never mess up. Good evening and welcome to the Peptide PhDs.
Hey, Dr. Mark, how you doing tonight?
I'm just great, Dr. Allen. We've got a fun one tonight. We're sort of going to go off script a little bit or off our normal program, right?
We really are. I tell you what, this is going to be a fun podcast tonight because we're kind of moving into some uncharted territory for us, but very necessary territory, don't you think?
Absolutely, yes. So, we've focused on, we talk about mostly peptides or anything peptide peripheral. And in our coverage of peptides, we've often covered the FDA-approved peptides. And then we've talked a lot about these natural peptides derived from nature, kind of a new area. But today we're going to talk about the other peptides, GASP, the gym science, the gray zones, the after-hours injections, right?
That's exactly right. We are going to be talking about therapeutic peptides, kind of this whole gray area that you just mentioned. Kind of what do they do? Are they natural? Are they modified? I mean, we're going to get into what kind of human data exists. What are the risks? I mean, so this is going to be a really nice look at an area that, is becoming really popular and alarmingly so.
Yeah, unless you're living under a rock. If you're on social media of any kind, if you're talking to your friends, you're hearing the names of some of these funny peptides. When I say funny peptides, I mean funny names like CJC 1295 or BPC 157 or ipamorelin, right? So these are kind of, we'll help you situate like where these come from, sort of how they fit in the landscape of peptides. But we're going to take a calm, scientific look of some of these most talked about peptides that you are seeing and hearing about on social media, wherever it might be. They're mostly injected peptides, but they're definitely right at the center of wellness culture today.
Yep, that's right. So, Dr. Mark, let's just jump right into chapter 1. What do you say? Because I think we've got a lot of information to talk about.
Yeah, chapter 1, we're going to talk a little bit about that peptide universe. I want to put things, I feel it's helpful to give you the landscape, to help you have a frame of reference. So first off, there are lots of what I would say now, maybe there's about 5 categories of peptides. So I'm going to start here. These are endogenous peptides. Now, you're a PhD, Dr. Allen. What does endogenous mean?
Endogenous means peptides that are actually made inside our body. So they're native to the human body.
Right. Anything that's made by your own body is called endogenous. And there are peptides that are endogenous, right? So the cells of your body, all of them, have the ability to send and receive peptides or small proteins that are the language of your body. It's really quite an amazing vocabulary, and it's all on call, right? So if you're hungry, I think that's a peptide, right?
Absolutely. How about if you're sick and your body has to go as an immunologist? I mean, you've been talking the whole endogenous peptide language for 40 plus years.
That's right. Yep. We often overlook those, but if you are sick, then usually it's because something has invaded your body, a virus, a bacteria, maybe even a parasite. The immune system knows what to do. So you usually have the frontline cell, whatever that immune cell might be, a neutrophil or T cell, macrophage, and it immediately sends an alert out to the rest of the body. Interesting also, we don't have time to dig into it too much, but those cells are in the blood, but they also might respond to messages from the blood, the the cells that are on the blood vessel wall, right? Because often the bacteria might be actually in the tissue. So now those endothelial cells send a message, and they cause the cell surface to be sticky so that those immune cells will roll along them and say, hey, something going on here. Let's recruit some of our friends. So yeah, the language of the immune system is very cool. And there are others too, right? What about if you're full?
Oh yeah, if you're full, I mean, how about ghrelin? Well, actually, that's a kind of a hunger signal. But then you've got CCK and GLP-1, which are satiety signals,
Right.
telling you that
Leptin,
you're
there's
full.
several, right?
Yeah, leptin as well. How about the love signal, Dr. Mark?
The love peptide, oxytocin, right? And if you hug someone for 8 seconds, you're going to feel that oxytocin, and that's a beautiful thing. So that's the endogenous peptide universe. And these are the body's language, and they're involved in all of those things, even pigmentation. Like you go out into the sun, there's some peptide messaging going on that says, hey, you need to step up the level of melatonin in your body. We get a little bit more brown to resist the UV light. So very cool. Okay. The second area, since scientists have discovered the power of these endogenous peptides, drugs have been made to mimic those, but then another person, the marketers have also cottoned on, right? So there are many actual protein hydrolysate ingredients. So we all know that, I think we've talked before, peptides are just small proteins, and proteins are just sequences of amino acids. So if you break up those proteins, what do you get? You get little sequences of amino acids. They may or may not mean anything. They may or may not actually be messengers that bind to a receptor on a cell. But you can technically, I suppose, still call them peptides. They're just not bioactive.
Yeah, that's right. They don't have a specific sequence that matches a receptor in our bodies. And so, really you have to look at them as being more structural. I mean, your body's going to use those amino acids. You still have those peptide transport systems that are going to carry them, but these things are really used to build other structures, to build muscle, to build fibers, to build tissues and things like that. And so I love the name that you coined for these particular peptides. They're really protein peptides, but you call them peptides in name only, pinos. I love that.
Exactly. They're pinos. And what they really are is, if the receptor on a cell is a lock, then pinos are basically a whole bunch of nonsense keys that are floating around that have no meaning, and they're never going to open the lock, right? You can technically call it a peptide, but it's not going to do you any good, right? So, all right. Now, the next is bioactive precision peptides. That's really where I feel like, Dr. Allen, you and me, that's our space, right? We share a bunch of information on this because I really feel like this is an amazing frontier. These are from nature. They're not just broken down proteins, but they have a particular sequence that allows them to unlock receptors in the body.
Exactly. And these sequences, they exist naturally. And for people this is kind of one of the common arguments that we get against bioactive precision peptides, is a lot of people will say that they're not stable. They're not able to be used because they're broken down. And we know for a fact that the day that we are born and the day that we start consuming mother's milk and colostrum from our moms, we literally have the ability to utilize bioactive precision peptides from the very first day. And, Dr. Mark, I'm not afraid to admit today, 19 months later, being with Make, that, 2 years ago, I didn't think that bioactive precision peptides really existed as well. And so I was very unknowledgeable and I was very skeptical, but I had to go do a lot of research on that. And when you do the research on bioactive peptides, you find out that we've known about bioactive peptides for dozens and dozens and dozens of years. These are nothing new, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of research in this space. But just people are becoming aware of it. So these have a defined sequence. They have a defined receptor. They have a known target tissue. They have a plausible mechanism, natural origin. And as you said, there are studies.
There are.
Yeah. So let's talk about the next one. I'm going to jump over the peptide category that we're talking tonight. And sort of I'm going to go straight to another category, and this is the FDA-approved drugs that are synthesized versions of peptides.
Yep. Yeah, these are drugs like our Ozempics and Wegovys and Mounjaros and different things like that. So they're definitely FDA approved. They are highly studied. They're synthesized. They're modified. They're very potent. They're regulated. They do have a known risk to benefit profile, although I'm going to tell you a story about that here in just a second, because I think that is ignored many times. And I've got a really, really powerful story that hit me this last weekend with a very close family member of mine. But, we've covered these before, but there are some things that are going on with this area that people really have to be aware of. So.
Okay, yeah. But to summarize, these are FDA approved. They're highly studied. They are synthetic. They're very potent, but they're very well regulated. And we have a pretty good idea of the risk-benefit profile. And again, we've covered these before, so we're not going to cover them tonight. Today, we're going to talk about something a little different. That's what we're calling, well, we're loosely going to call it the gray market, but a lot of people call it the compounding pharmacy. You called it something else just a second ago.
The illegitimate market, or
that's not what you said.
Yeah, there are the gym rat market. I mean, there are a number of markets for these particular peptides, but this is the segment that we get hit with a lot, and we get compared to a lot. And really, Dr. Mark, these other peptides, there are no comparison, because they're very much, and we like to refer to them as therapeutic peptide drugs, because that's really what they are, very much singular in nature. They're compounded in a pharmacy or compounded in a laboratory somewhere. They're basically, essentially, for all practical purposes, regulated as research chemicals now. They're not FDA approved. There are very few of them that even have any real clinical studies or clinical data behind them, certainly not human data. In fact, we found, as we were doing our work for this, what we found is there's a lot of rabbit studies and a lot of mice studies. I shouldn't even say a lot. There are some rabbit studies, there are some mice studies, but there are very, very few human studies.
Yeah. Well, let's go to chapter 2 then. Let's dig right in, because I'm sure you're dying to sort of hear. Some of these will be very familiar to you, and we're just going to go through them one by one. We're going to go through 5 or 6 that you've probably heard of and that are quite popular. And we only really have 5 or 6 minutes to cover each. But the category in general, then, to sort of reiterate what Dr. Allen has said, these are compounded peptides, and that really means you sort of make them in your own lab. They might be made in China, some made in the US, right? They're research chemical peptides. So you'll often find on the label, not for, it's for research use only or something like that.
Right.
That's how they kind of get around the category that they're in. They're not FDA approved. There's maybe one here that we're going to talk about tonight that didn't make FDA approval, but it's still sort of used in this other compounding area. They're synthetic analogs, and we have, as you mentioned, right, limited long-term data. So let's begin with one that you may have heard of, BPC 157.
Yeah, before we get started, Dr. Mark, I just want to make everybody just remember, we're not here to condemn and we're not here to endorse. We're really here to provide great information and ask very intelligent questions. And that's what we want to do. We want to ask questions. We want to open our minds. We want to think about these things. And, these things are powerful. These things are powerful. And if they're not used right, they can be incredibly dangerous. So I want you to keep that in mind.
Yes. Okay. So thanks. That's a really good disclaimer there. A good, we're going to not only ask intelligent questions about these in each category, but hopefully this will help you to ask questions too next time you encounter one of these, and you'll know all the right questions to ask. So the BPC 157, the BPC stands for body protection compound. I'm guessing 157 is maybe, the lab version that ended up sort of being used. I don't know if anyone really knows, but that's probably where it came from. And we call this, some people call it the Wolverine peptide, right? It's if you got a torn tendon, a bad shoulder, gut inflammation, according to the internet, BPC 157 fixes just about everything. I think this one is about the most hyped healing peptide in the fitness culture right now, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you literally can't talk to anybody, and we get this question all the time. What do you have that's like BPC 157? So we literally get asked this nonstop. And of course, the answer within our product line is we really have nothing like BPC 157 because it is a very specific peptide that's derived from a fragment that was originally identified in gastric juice. And again, like you said, it's called body protection compound. But, you know, in the bioactive peptide, precision peptide world, we do not have this specific peptide.
Not yet, but we're looking.
Yet. Yep. We would love to find something similar to it, but we do not. But in our endogenous peptides, we make it endogenously, though. So
Yes.
it is an endogenous peptide.
Yep. Now let's talk about, we're sort of going to go fairly systematically here. And the first question that we're going to ask, right, apart from where was it derived and what does it do, is how much the human clinical studies, and like I know, Alan, you've done hours of preparation before this podcast tonight. You've dug into clinical studies. If they are there, you found them. You found whether they're clinical, whether they're in vitro or animal studies. So what did you find?
Well, we found a lot of animal data. And you know, the animal data is really interesting when you start to look at it. We've seen animal data showing that BPC 157 has anti-inflammatory effects. Kind of the mechanism of action with that is that it downregulates pro-inflammatory cytokines and kind of shifts your local the region that you injected into a pro-healing type profile. So, you know, very limited human clinical data, Dr. Mark. It's just not there, but there is a little bit of animal data, mostly rabbits and mice. So, you know,
I was actually really surprised about that because, you know, one of the top criticisms that we get, and, you know, we field a lot of stuff, right? When you get as famous as we are, you get a lot of hate mail. I've always wanted to say that, and I think it's not really true, but so, you know, we've talked to a lot of doctors. Like there's been quite an uptick in interest in what we do in the last few months. And one of the things that we get is like, yeah, there's just not enough research in what you're doing. And I will say, well, in comparison to what? First of all, our peptides have human clinical studies. And it's like, well, we've got these other ones that people are using and that doctors are prescribing. And apart from the FDA ones, I was actually really surprised. For example, BPC 157, the one that I've heard the most about. And when we really dug into it, no human studies and even the animal studies were not like super strong. Now, I've heard a lot of anecdotes, right? Humans that are taken that say, oh, it worked great. Or other humans that just said, yeah, it didn't really make a difference. So this is very limited data. And that was a huge surprise to me. Is that a surprise to the audience? Because sure was to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a surprise to me as well, Dr. Mark. I mean, some of the things that we saw when we were looking at some of the studies that, you know, like, for example, with BPC 157, you know, you always hear how effective this is. But when you looked at the intramuscular bioavailability studies that we looked at, that the intramuscular bioavailability of BPC 157, it ranges from about 14 to 19% in rats and about 45% approximately in dogs. And so there is fairly low bioavailability of an injectable BPC 157 peptide. So, you know, and then the other side of that is that it's metabolized extremely rapidly. And, you know, I think that's probably one reason, you know, one of the things that I was studying as I was looking at this, some of these things you have to take up to 2 to 3 times a day. And BPC 157 and some of these, like, for example, the Wolverine stack, you talked about it being the Wolverine peptide. There's also a Wolverine stack that uses TB500 along with it. And like you have to take that twice a day in order to get the maximum benefit. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just not one that wants to go around injecting myself with needles all day long, twice a day, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I hope, this one is just such a good idea. I hope it gets more data on it. But
Yeah.
so the next thing that we ask is then, what is the defined receptor? And I don't think that we found one. But let me show you, the hints are that it acts on wound healing. And the way that it does that is with what's called neovascularization, which means new blood vessel growth. So think of you cutting your finger or just sort of some kind of a scratch or a wound, especially if it's kind of more of an open wound, right? The tissue, now there's a gap, right? Let's say in your skin. So that gap has to be filled in. So there's tissue remodeling happens. What happens is, one of the first things is that the blood vessels have to sort of grow into this new space. So this is what happens in wound healing. And at least these non-human studies, maybe some in vitro studies, sort of indicate that it is causing neovascularization. I find this a really interesting area. And so, but it worries me a wee bit. Let me tell you why. As an immunologist and as a cancer immunologist, I did study for years mechanisms to inhibit cancer cells. One thing that we know, I don't want to freak everyone out, but one thing that we know is that when a tumor gets to bigger than 1 millimeter in diameter, that's really small, it can't survive unless there's blood vessel growth that goes into the tumor to feed it, right? And neovascularization does that. And so, we were working actually on compounds from nature that inhibited neovascularization as a strategy. So now when you think the opposite of that is happening, it worries me a wee bit. That's just a thought there. We'll find out. This is, I guess, one of the issues with, like you said, using something where we don't have all the safety data, we don't have the human data yet. So just a cautionary tale from an old immunologist.
Yeah. I'm kind of reading like Norma's response, and we get this a lot, right? Very surprising. I had a guy that worked with my husband that asked if we sold BPC 157 because he did a lot of research and he wanted to use it. Well, I can promise you, he probably didn't do near as much research as we did to prepare for this and to look at this. And if you're looking at animal studies, what little human evidence there is very retrospective or observational in nature. And, a lot of times what they did on some of these was like they went into intra-articular, like joint injections, injecting those directly into the joints to actually get any benefit in some of these studies. And so the research on humans is a little bit alarming to me because this tends to be the one that people just, I'm just going to go take BPC 157. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care if it's made in China or some lab, who knows where. And they're just willing to jump in and just inject this stuff in their bodies. And that's a little bit concerning. So,
yeah, let me, I know we're only supposed to spend 5 minutes on each, but we might spend more. Let me share with you something. So how valuable are animal studies? So animals are a heck of a lot like humans. And I must confess, I've done a bunch of animal studies, right? I have but the time, it was about the 80s, and I was doing some studies. And there was at that time this surgeon and a researcher at a children's hospital in Boston and Harvard Medical School, and his name was Judah Folkman. And he was actually investigating this area of inhibiting tumor growth by inhibiting neovascularization. And it worked brilliantly in mice. So here we go. He realized, okay, new tumors need new blood vessel formation to keep them alive. Let's inhibit that. And in mice, probably Balb-C mouse, a white mouse in the lab, he just said basically, eureka, this is incredible. And being in a cancer research laboratory, I was very excited. The whole team was like pretty much moved by this research and thought maybe we're here. Further studies in humans, it did not work at all, right? At least the drug that he was using that worked in mice. I'm not saying the strategy is not sound, but there's one where it didn't translate from animals to humans. we were somewhat surprised and awfully disappointed. But this is why we, Alan and I, when we're looking at peptides and when we formulate a product with a peptide in it from nature, we rely on human studies. Animal studies are great. They point us in a good direction. And cell studies can tell us what the receptor is. But ultimately, it needs to work in humans.
Yeah. For me, there's in one of the research studies that we put together, there was one phrase that really hit home to me with BPC 157, Dr. Mark, and that was this. This phrase says musculoskeletal and wound healing outcomes. The strongest evidence base for BPC 157 relates to enhanced healing in tendons, ligaments, muscles, bone fiber junctions, and skin, with functional improvements reported in several rat and rabbit models.
Yep.
That kind of says it all.
Yep. And I would say, like, glass is half full. That means it's very promising. And I hope we can get more data on this. But there are some, I think that we need some more data on this one. And so, I think this is good for us all to know, right? How much data is there? And do you want to try it? Well, I'm not going to stop you, of course. But just know that, it may work, it may not. We don't have enough data. Shall we move on to the next one?
Absolutely.
Right. Introduce us to the next one that you researched.
So the next one is called CJC 1295. And CJC is really considered a long-acting growth hormone releasing hormone amplifier, GHRH, amplifier. And this is one of those peptides you take it at night before bedtime. It helps people sleep deeper, recover faster, lean out. That's kind of the claims to fame for CJC 1295. But its mechanism of action, its underlying mechanism of action, it's a modified growth hormone releasing hormone analog. So
I find this very clever. Like, scientists are clever. This is it's so interesting because when we sleep at night, right, there is this growth hormone releasing hormone that goes to the pituitary and causes the release of growth hormone that then helps with the muscle. And this is pretty cool that they are stimulating the body to produce its own growth hormone, right? I just think that's great. So let's look at where it comes from. This is it's a modified analog, right? It's synthetic, and they did something in this one. They did something to this to make it increase its half-life.
They did. Yeah, there's two versions of CJC 1295 that are available on the market. There's a CJC 1295 with DAC, which is a terminal end modifier that actually extends half-life. And then there's a CJC 1295 without DAC. Now, the primary difference between those two, Dr. Mark, the CJC 1295 with DAC has a half-life of 7 days. The CJC 1295 without DAC has a half-life of about 15 to 20 minutes. So it is rapidly metabolized. It's very similar to the bioactive precision peptides. But when I think about this, and you and I have had conversations about this, and we'll throw this out there, but when you think about stimulating growth hormone, releasing hormone for 7 solid days, what goes through your mind?
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit before, right? So
we have.
And the concept, the basic concept, guys, is that generally these peptides are produced on demand, right? You're hungry, then the peptide will be, you're hungry because a peptide has recognized that, it's been monitoring the nutrient receptors and says, hey, you're lacking in nutrients, you need some nutrients, some macronutrients. So I'm going to make you feel hungry. So it will increase your food-seeking behavior. These things always just come in pulses. Once the need is satisfied, then the whole thing calms down and different signals come into play. We know, we've talked about this before, right, Alan, that when you are stimulating your body to go into anabolic mode, that it actually goes through a sort of a transduction system in the cell called mTOR. That mTOR has at least 2 functions, not just anabolism, but also body cleanup. right?
Yeah.
When it's not growing the cell, it's actually resting, and it's sending a signal to the body to clean up the zombie cells, the dead cells, the senescent cells, the cancer cells. So if you are just turning on anabolism that long incessantly, then other functions of the body don't work. The normal pulse, the normal circadian rhythm of these messenger systems is completely overridden.
Yeah. When you think about this particular peptide, CJC1295, it impacts not only growth hormone releasing hormone, but it impacts our IGF-1 as well. And so when you talk about this chronic pulsing of IGF-1 and growth hormone releasing hormone over a period of 7 days, you're not just getting a single feedback loop activation on growth hormone releasing hormone, you're also getting a negative feedback loop activation on IGF-1 as well. If you're getting, a threefold increase in IGF-1 over this 7-day period of time, then like we've talked about many times before, this negative feedback loop activation is going to cause long-term issues with our body remembering how to produce growth hormone and IGF-1. To me, that is going to be a devastating outcome at some point later on.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting. Very, very smart idea, but something that I still feel like you need to be a little bit careful, especially for the reasons that we stated. Let me just ask the question, where are people getting these? Like, Alan, I think you know the answer to that.
Yeah, well, off the internet primarily, and which is a little bit scary. Now, we are starting to see the FDA do some things about this. I've seen, basically cease and desist letters from the FDA that have been published.
Depending on their claims, right? Especially if they're copying drugs and making those drug claims.
Yeah, if they're copying the drugs and making those same drug claims, absolutely. But they're starting to go after some of these compounding pharmacies and other places that are making them as well. And the thing that I have that concerns me the most is it seems like some of these guys are here today and then they're gone tomorrow, and then 3 days later there's another new peptide company opening up somewhere. And so it's super easy to get these things. You order them from China, they're made in China, you import them in, and next thing you know, you've got yourself a peptide company. So that's another big concern, because what are you really getting? And the other thing that we get asked all the time, Dr. Mark, and I'm getting a little bit off track here, but we get asked all the time for C of A's, because all these peptides, all these therapeutic peptides that we're talking about, this gray area peptides, they all claim they're C of A's, this piece of paper that they're putting on the internet. Well, you know what? You better start asking the question, are those C of A's real?
Yeah.
Because anybody could sit there and take a word processor and make a C of A and put it on the internet and say, we have a C of A. Well, I don't know about that. Do you really have a C of A? And are you really going to trust that that C of A is legitimate? Because I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of them are not legitimate. So
yeah,
that's another issue that I've got with this whole gray market peptide deal.
We had one of the folks that is messaging us right now, who's really knows a lot in this area. Mark said, when we asked, where do we get them from? He said, well, he named a couple of websites, right? And then said, you just need to agree that you're older than 21 and you won't use it on people or animals. I find that quite interesting. Okay, what else are you going to do with it? So inject an orange. I don't know. Practice. So we have some human data, but they're very small studies, right? So it's really quite interesting there. I don't know. Do we have any more to say about this one? It's quite interesting.
This one needs to be if you're going to choose to use this one, you better proceed with caution, because, and I certainly wouldn't add the one into my body with the DAC in it for sure, because I don't want growth hormone pulsating from my pituitary for 7 consecutive days with no rest.
Yeah. To give you an idea, the body, like the average person, like if you're a really good deep sleeper, like my wife is, you'll get about 2 hours of deep sleep a night. And it's not all at once, right? It's in a couple of pulses through the night. That's kind of like how the body designs this growth hormone to be released. And it's nothing like sort of hitting you for 7 hours. So Um,
Yep.
yep. Well,
Yeah. Dr. Mark Simpson says something that's really important, because I actually saw this firsthand as I was going through and doing all these research, this research on all these different peptide suppliers. You would actually see the exact same C of A across multiple suppliers. And
yeah.
so that
While we're on that
was what,
topic, like,
yeah.
let me say, I worked with a supplier once, and I got a certificate of analysis from them for a certain ingredient. And then we were using another ingredient from the same supplier. So we got a certificate of analysis, and then another ingredient, and we got a certificate of analysis for that. So this should be 3 different certificates of analysis. And it showed, past this, past that. And then there was a signature at the bottom, right? And I noticed something funny, like there was the same little black spot on each one. And then I held them all up to the light, all 3 of them together, and realized that that signature was exactly the same in exactly the same spot for all 3 different certificates of analysis. So it just showed me that they were what we call dry labbing it, right? Just pretending they had a certificate of analysis. So yeah, I guess anyone can do that. But what's the message? The message is that you need to develop trust in the people that you're buying products from. I would like to think that what we're doing here is sort of providing a bit of trust there. You're getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, understanding the kind of, you need to understand what kind of company it is. And when you're just getting things sort of sight unseen off the internet, there's a little bit more risk in that approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is. Be careful. It's one of those buyer beware deals. You better be very, very careful what you're putting in your body.
Yeah. All right, let's try to remain neutral and positive with the next one. This one is called ipamorelin. So this is more of a sort of a drug type name, right? When you have that suffix there, morelin, it really it refers to sort of a growth hormone secretagogue type product, right? So tell us about this one. What does this one do, Dr. Allen?
Yeah. So like you said, it's a growth hormone secretagogue. I mean, this is one of the bodybuilders, biohackers' favorite peptides. And we hear a lot about this one. But, it kind of stimulates growth hormone without the cortisol spikes of some of the older peptides. Now, what it really does, its mechanism of action is it is a ghrelin receptor agonist. It's very short acting. A lot of times the ipamorelin is actually combined with CJC. I know that it's very short acting, but ipamorelin will hit your body very, very rapidly. Some of the research that I saw was that when people are taking the ipamorelin, as I'm studying this, I'm seeing, they're taking a very, very small amount. They're injecting it simultaneously with their CJC 1295 or whatever they're taking it with, but it hits your body hard. And they talk about accelerated heart rate, rapid breathing, feeling their pulse into their neck. Like, this thing hits your system. I was very surprised at what I was reading about the ipamorelin and about how fast a subcutaneous injectable peptide hits your system. But it does. It's real fast.
Huh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I typed out in the comments here, secretagogue, and people might wonder about this. And not everyone has had the opportunity that I had to go to a boys' high school in Australia where you had to learn the classics, Greek and Latin. I did, but I'm just kind of pulling your leg a little bit. So a gog comes from that Greek mean leader or bringer or driver, right? So think of demagogue, right? So this was like someone who led the people and incited the people. And so in this case, secretagogue means it's something that sort of causes something to be secreted. So there you go. You can impress your friends at parties knowing the etiology of that word.
Yep. All right. So a couple of other things about the ipamorelin. Again, people are getting it through these peptide telehealth clinics, whatever, compounding pharmacies, online gray markets. You can look at how it's cleared from the body. I mean, there's a lot of things that we did research wise, but in summary, really, it's a ghrelin receptor agonist. It helps to pulse our growth hormone. It has an appetite interaction in that it helps to suppress our appetite because of its ghrelin receptor agonist, right? And it does so. The claim to fame is that it uses less cortisol and prolactin than other older growth hormone releasing peptides do. And then again, like we've said, the human data on this is still very, very limited.
Okay, so I saw that you wrote a little white paper, right? You got in, you dug into this, and you found some studies. And the message that you gave me was that it was limited long-term, especially long-term human data.
Yeah.
So that's the general message, right?
Yeah, the long-term, there virtually is no long-term data on any of these.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but like in the when microwaves first came around, people were scaring me a little bit, saying there's no long-term data on this and it's heating up your food, but is it inverting molecules? Is it going to cause cancer? And I got to say, I was a little worried. But 50 years later, we have a lot of long-term data, and I'm feeling pretty comfortable with the microwave these days. I feel like things that you inject in your body too, you really want to have some long-term data. I just feel like we shouldn't underestimate the importance of that.
Yeah,
we don't want to
agree.
be human guinea pigs, right?
Well, and we've got a whole bunch of people that are just willing to step up and be guinea pigs. And so over the next several years, we're going to see a lot of long-term data coming out.
Yeah,
So
even from some of the FDA ones, no doubt.
we
Okay,
are.
so that was ipamorelin. There's one that's got a name that's just similar to it, right? This is our next one, and it's called tesamorelin.
Tesamorelin.
Right. This is one that I understand actually made it through the FDA, right? It was it's like the cousin in this growth hormone releasing family, and it was developed to reduce visceral fat in HIV patients. Is that what your data found?
That's right. Yep. So it's FDA approved for HIV lipodystrophy. Sure is. So, but that's not what it's being used for the vast majority of us. So,
yeah, and that's something I think that's really interesting to point out here. So you have in the medical world, you can have certain drugs that are approved and studied for a certain reason. In this case, it's very narrow, right? For HIV lipodystrophy. This is so interesting because then doctors can choose to use that drug because its side effect is good for another area, right? So in some ways, Ozempic is a bit like that, right? Because it was developed for diabetics, but then the side effect was weight loss. I'm not sure. I think now it's probably been approved for weight loss, so it's no longer what you would call off-label. But in this gray peptide space, people are using this particular drug, but for a different purpose. I believe that's called off-label use, and it comes with its own risks, right?
Yeah, it does. And, when you look at, people are going to say, well, ipamorelin and tesamorelin must be the same thing, right? Or at least close to it. And they both impact growth hormone levels, Dr. Mark, but they do it differently, right? Ipamorelin does it through growth hormone releasing hormone, whereas tesamorelin actually causes your pituitary to secrete endogenous growth hormone directly. So, the ipamorelin, where it causes the actual growth hormone releasing hormone to actually go in and work its magic to do that. But tesamorelin is involved in direct growth hormone secretion. So it's totally different mechanism. And, fortunately for this one, they haven't got a tesamorelin with DAC to make it long lasting because, oh my gosh, if you could imagine, a 7-day half-life on something like this would be devastating to our pituitary glands. It would burn out in a matter of weeks.
So where do people get it? It's my understanding that this is prescription only. You can get it from specialty pharmacies. It really requires legitimate medical oversight, but I don't know if this is available sort of on the internet or through this sort of gray market.
You could actually get, some of the companies that Mark was talking about up above, Peptide Sciences and so forth. Oh, you can get it right off of their websites.
There you go. I thought you had to go to the dark web to get it, but apparently it's right out there.
No. And I tell you what, now that we're talking about it, everybody that's sitting here talking about these types of peptides, you're going to get 500 ads a day over your Facebook and Instagram accounts. They're going to come up from everywhere. Yeah.
That's even scarier. Go
I
to that
know, I
website,
know.
be assured to get lots of spam.
Oh, I tell you what, do a little research. You're going to be absolutely flabbergasted at the number of peptide Instagrams and Facebook ads, and it's nonstop all day long. I've learned the hard way on that because of all this research.
Sorry, guys. If you've already Googled these, you might be a little bit in trouble.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. This next one is, I find it super interesting. It's called PT-141. I don't know what the PT stands for. Do you, Alan?
I do not. I do not know what PT-141 stands for. And I tried to actually look that up, and I think it's just a made up. I think the whole PT-141 is all made up.
It makes it sound pretty cool, but there's another name called bremelanotide. Bremelanotide. That's it.
Bremelanotide.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
The emphasis has got to be on the right syllable.
Yeah. It's now this one is a melanocortin receptor. So we already talked a little bit about you talked earlier a little bit about melanotan and the importance of it. You mentioned that at the very beginning, but this is actually a melanocortin receptor agonist, and it does a couple of things. It can help us. It helps with erectile dysfunction. Let's just put it that way. But Dr. Mark, this is one of the few things, and this is one of the few compounds that actually had quite a few human studies on it. I was really impressed with the amount of data on this particular peptide, because it has human clinical studies in both men and women and shows some fairly powerful benefits. But that doesn't mean you just run out and get this stuff. You need to be really, really careful with this stuff.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, from your research, that it was FDA approved for hypoactive sexual desire disorder in women.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. But, I'm not sure why they do not use it. I'm not sure why it's not, available via prescription, or at least not that I could find in my research. So
interesting.
But I will tell you this, I think every peptide company in the world that you're going to start getting ads from will actually have it. So,
yeah. Well, and I'm really surprised at how much maybe people trust others. So I have a friend who, we went to lunch the other day, and he said, you're into peptides. Like, I found some amazing ones. So I have this friend who sort of gives me peptides, and he gave me this one, and he just labeled it fun. And I took that peptide, and I really basically couldn't stand up in public for a couple of days. And I'm like, you took it? And it was just labeled fun? Like, yeah, I think you got to take it a little more seriously.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was this one or not, but just the general message there is interesting, right? So we can get this one from compounding pharmacies. I believe that this one is it's injectable, but I understand that one of the dosage forms is actually inhaled, right? And a nasal spray.
Intranasal. That's right. In a nasal spray or an actual nasal gel as well.
How interesting. You don't need $100 bills for this one. Apparently you can just
squirt it right up there. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a super interesting one. I don't know. Did you mention what the receptor was in this one? Because
it is a melanocortin receptor agonist.
Yes, there are several melanocortin receptors in the body, and we'll mention another one later. But it's super interesting. So
and this is melanocortin 4 receptor is the primary mechanism of action on this one.
Yeah. Okay. So this is an interesting one, and I find it fascinating that, again, this one can be intranasal. It's just so interesting, and I feel like if we could find a natural peptide for libido, that would be really nice. If we could find a natural peptide that was sort of more like an oxytocin that sort of help with human connection, that would be nice too. But we're not there yet. And, one of the things that Dr. Allen and I do is, man, we are digging up all sorts of stones, talking to researchers all over the world, really sort of in the search for the natural peptides, because we really feel like ultimately the gravitational pull will be away from the drugs and the gray market into the natural space. I think that's what people want. But we just have to make sure we do our homework and do the human studies.
Yeah. One thing about the PT-141, Dr. Mark, that's really interesting when I started doing the half-life research on it, because, we always want to see half-life, and that helps us to understand how hard something might hit our systems. And, the PT-141, the half-life, you could see some references to 30 minutes to 1 hour, and then you would see other half-life references to 2 to 3 days. And so like your friend talked about fun, I'm probably positive with all the research that we've done on these peptides that it probably was the PT-141, but I'm also inclined to think that the half-life of this has got to be more in the 2 to 3 day range than it is in the 1 to 2 hour range.
Yeah, it seems to be. And we've talked about this before, but I'll mention it just briefly, just as a teaching moment, right? So there are amino acids that are found in nature. And so your body produces all sorts of proteins and peptides, and they're with this basically a toolkit of about 20 amino acids. When you synthesize, you can actually open up the box to a whole bunch more tools. So they find amino acids that are actually not found, produced naturally by the body. And then we mentioned before this, so you can do amino acid substitutions to make it more or less potent or last longer or shorter. And you can also add this side chain that we mentioned called DAC, which basically kind of makes it more lipid soluble, or it's chaperoned through the body longer without being destroyed. So it's an interesting, if I was a pharmaceutical chemist, I would have all sorts of fun with this, and I'm sure they are.
Oh, man.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more peptide. This is a really interesting one. It's called melanotan-2. And from the name, can anyone guess what it does? Melanotan. Yes, you want to tan without the sun? This is kind of like the underground tanning peptide. And yes, it does have a side effect. It seems to increase libido, but it wasn't really designed as a cosmetic product, right? This is a synthetic alpha MSH analog.
Yep.
You've done
Melanocyte-stimulating hormone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So alpha MSH stands for alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. And basically it just activates those melanocortin receptors broadly throughout the body. And when you think about melanocortin, yes, that has to do with the melanin in our skin and being able to tan. And it actually has been shown to actually help you tan versus getting a sunburn. So one of the claims is that it has a protective effect against sunburn. But the other thing that it does is, and if you remember with PT-141, we talked about melanocortin receptor agonist. Well, guess what? It works with melanotan is often stacked with PT-141 as an erectile dysfunction stack as well. So there are some anecdotal evidence that the two work together. That's what I would call it, is anecdotal. I've not seen a study using that particular combination together. I've seen, the studies different separately, but unfortunately with melanotan-2, Dr. Mark, there are not a lot of studies. You talk about few and far between.
Yep.
Those studies were very rare.
Yeah. And this is why it's not surprising that this, along with many of the others that we mentioned earlier tonight, like BPC 157, they don't have FDA approval. And when you think about some of the side effects, nausea and darkening of moles, like that one scares me a little bit. These melanocytes in the skin, right? There's such a thing as melanoma, right? Which is a sort of a cancer that affects these melanocytes. And so there's no long-term studies in terms of safety, and that's maybe one that I would worry about a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, again, in summary, you've got MC1, MC4 activation. You've got tanning, libido side effects, not FDA approved. You can get it on these underground peptide websites, I guess, if you want to take that chance. But quite frankly, I don't think I do. So,
yeah. Well, that's just a few. It's a smattering. Like if we get enough feedback, maybe we'll do some more that are out there. But these are really sort of some of the interesting ones, some of the ones that you've heard of. If you Googled it as a result of this podcast, sorry, but this is going to come up a lot more on your feeds, right? So we've been talking about the other peptides tonight. We've talked about some of these most commonly available ones, the ones you're hearing about on social media, the ones that your friends are experimenting with, the ones that promise muscle, recovery, tanning, performance, longevity even. I really hope that our discussion tonight has helped you answer some of those important questions.
Yeah. Like some of the questions like what receptor does a peptide target? Is it natural, modified? Is it synthetic? Are there real human clinical trials behind it? Or basically, we're just talking about mouse data or animal data. I'll tell you this, we mentioned a lot of anecdotal evidence. The message boards are loaded with anecdotal evidence. But in my mind, I'm not so sure that I trust a lot of that anecdotal evidence. So you got to know who's manufacturing it. You got to know that they're legit. And right now, we just don't have the data, especially that long-term safety data, to be able to support just jumping out there and do it without a ton of absolute research on this stuff. It better be good research too.
Yeah. Yep. I think just from some of the comments here, I think people have been surprised, right? People are really surprised that, people might say, well, your bioactive precision peptides don't really have studies. Well, we actually have real bioactive precision peptides with defined sequences, defined targets, and human clinical studies. But I think it does surprise people when they learn that these other peptides that it feels like everyone's taking are not FDA approved and have very limited data. It's a real surprise, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we have a lot more human clinical data on our clinically proven ingredients than a lot of these guys do. I'll tell you that. And if they want to sit there and argue, well, mouse study shows this or mouse study shows that, well, I'm not interested in that. That's all sounding good. That sounds really good. Potentially it's great.
Yep.
Where are the human long-term clinical studies showing that this stuff actually does it? So, and they don't, most of the time, they just do not exist.
Yes.
So,
well, I hope that's been of value to you. We always like to have a little bit of levity towards the end. So we would like to credit some of our contributors tonight. We have a Bob Dylan specialist, I Shall Be Released. And our bolt tightener is Tilda Pliers Slip. Tilda Pliers Slip.
How about our book critic, Odessa Page Turner?
Oh, that is a page turner.
Odessa is a page turner.
We have
and our Utah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Mark. Our Utah funeral director, Hadley Newham.
Yep, Hadley Newham. Our break adjuster's name is Shlomo Quigley.
Oh, gosh. Our breathalyzer administrator, Eureka Garlic.
Yep. And our British culinary specialist is Sir Irving Spoon. Well, you've done it again. You've spent another hour with us. I love that you chose science over scrolling, the cell signals over cat videos, and peptides over procrastination.
That's right, guys. So now it's time to go make a difference. And you know what? I'm going to just say this. Next time somebody tries to say that your product doesn't have studies, our product doesn't have studies, we're going to use the injectable peptides because they have studies. Well, now you know they don't.
We actually do. Mm-hmm.
We actually do. They don't. Go make a difference, and don't be afraid to call them out on their BS. That's where I've gotten to be after doing all this research this week, Dr. Mark. Like, I'm tired of the BS of them saying, I'm going with the injectable. Well, you know what? Be careful with that. Be careful what you ask for. So
yeah, we're grumpy old men, and Woe betide you if you step on our lawns too. We'll probably shout at you. Um, next week, we actually will be at an event in Orlando. So we're going to be actually presenting on stage about how we can support folks that are on one of the more powerful synthetic peptides. So we won't be doing our usual podcast next week, but we will see you on the 12th of March. So until then,
get back with the people that got you on the call. Get with the people that you got on the call. And like I said, send your products to us. Send your product questions to us at science@makewellness.com, and come back and see us in 2 weeks, guys. You guys have a great, great weekend. It's going to be an awesome weekend this weekend, Dr. Mark. The fish are biting.
All right. The sun is shining. Bye-bye, everyone.